Chicago, 1893. A city alive with hope, industry, and spectacle. The World's Fair had drawn millions, all eager to marvel at the wonders of the new century, electric lights, dazzling inventions, and dreams of progress. But hidden in the shadows of that shining fair, another kind of wonder had been built. A building so strange, so labyrinthine, so cruel in its design that no visitor ever saw it for what it truly was until it was too late. They called it a hotel, a place for weary travelers, fairgoers, and young women seeking new lives in the booming city. But behind its respectable brick walls lay corridors that led nowhere, doors that locked from the outside, and rooms sealed so tight no sound could escape. It would later be remembered by a far darker name: the Murder Castle. Imagine this. You step off the bustling streets of Chicago. The fairgrounds glow behind you, laughter and music fill the air. Ahead, a hotel promises comfort and safety. You walk inside, but as the door clicks shut, you realize the hallway twists where it should not. Windows look out into brick walls, and when you reach for the doorknob of your room, it doesn't open from the inside. No one hears your cries, no one sees you vanish, and in the furnace below, the fire is already burning. But before we descend into this true story, let me ask you something. Where in the world are you watching from tonight? And if you dare to explore more of history's darkest secrets, subscribe to Cold Mysteries. Every week we take you deeper into the shadows of the past. Stories too chilling for the history books, but too unforgettable to remain buried. Now, let us step inside the Murder Castle. His name was Herman Webster Mudgett, but the world came to know him as Dr. H. H. Holmes. At first glance, he was the picture of refinement, a charming young doctor with piercing blue eyes, a neat moustache, and a soft voice that drew people in. He smiled easily, spoke with confidence, and had a gift for earning trust. Women described him as magnetic. Employers praised his intelligence, but behind that polite bow, behind the immaculate suit, there pulsed something monstrous, a hunger carefully hidden and perfectly calculated. In 1889, Holmes arrived in Chicago buying a small drugstore in the Englewood district. Across the street, he began constructing a massive block-long building. He told neighbors it would be a hotel for visitors of the upcoming World's Fair. But the workers who built it never saw the full design. Holmes fired crews regularly, ensuring no one man knew the full blueprint. Walls were rebuilt. Staircases ended in brick. Rooms were soundproofed, fitted with peepholes, hidden gas lines and trapdoors. It was not a hotel, it was a machine designed for disappearance. Hundreds would walk through its doors during the fair of 1893. Some would never walk out, and Holmes, the smiling doctor, the trusted landlord, the respected businessman, would vanish them so completely. Their families would wait years before realizing they were already gone. This is the true story of America's first serial killer, and the murder hotel that shocked the world. Chicago was a city of wonders. But for those who stepped into Holmes's castle, wonder became terror, and the fair that promised the future became a graveyard of the innocent. In the summer of 1893, Chicago stood at the center of the world. The world's Columbian Exposition, the Great World's Fair, opened its gates, dazzling millions of visitors with electric lights, monumental architecture and inventions that promised a new age. The city was alive with energy. Trains brought crowds by the thousands. Hotels overflowed. Streets buzzed with vendors, performers, and dreamers who believed they were stepping into the future. For the first time, America felt unstoppable. But beneath the glamour, Chicago was also a city of shadows. It was a place where wealth and poverty collided on every corner. The fair glittered, but outside its gates, streets filled with pickpockets, swindlers, and predators eager to exploit the naive and the hopeful. Young women in particular arrived in droves. Secretaries, seamstresses, shopgirl, all seeking work and independence in a city that promised opportunity. They carried little more than a suitcase, a few coins, and the belief that Chicago would take them in. Many never left. Into this chaos stepped Dr. H. H. Holmes. To the fairgoers, he was a respectable figure, a successful businessman with a brand new, Hotel just a stone's throw from the exposition. He smiled at strangers, charmed the young women who came seeking work, and promised families safety in his lodgings. But Holmes saw something else. He saw a city overflowing with the lost and the anonymous. People whose disappearances would barely be noticed, whose names would vanish in the flood of visitors. And he had built his castle for them. Englewood, where Holmes's hotel stood, was a bustling neighborhood of shops and houses, but even among the crowded blocks Holmes's building drew the eye. 3 stories tall, a confusing sprawl of brick and windows, its very design seemed strange. Neighbors joked about its endless construction. Crews were fired halfway through projects. Walls were torn down and rebuilt. Staircases ended abruptly. But Holmes always had an excuse: cost-cutting, redesigns, or clever business secrecy. No, one suspected the truth, that every change, every brick laid, was calculated to conceal. The building itself was an accomplice. During the fair, Chicago's population nearly doubled. 500,000 people poured through the city in a single day. Holmes's hotel, just blocks from the fairgrounds, became a magnet for the unwary. Travelers looking for rooms, young women looking for work, families searching for a safe place to rest. They entered through its polished doors, marveling at the fine decor. None realized that the very walls around them hid a labyrinth of soundproof rooms, hidden chutes, and locked chambers where escape was impossible. To the outside world, Holmes was the perfect gentleman. He attended social clubs, paid polite visits, and even extended credit to local merchants. His charm disarmed suspicion. Even as women vanished, boarders, employees, guests, their disappearances were swallowed by the chaos of the fair. The city was too busy celebrating progress to notice the silence left behind, and Holmes thrived in that silence. Chicago in 1893 was a city of light, wonder, and ambition. But in Holmes's castle, it became something else: a stage, a trap, a place where innocence walked in and shadows closed the door behind it. The fair dazzled the world. Holmes made sure his victims never saw it again. Before the murder castle rose over Chicago's streets, there was simply a man. Born Herman Webster Mudgett in New Hampshire in 1861, he came into the world in the quiet of a farming family. His childhood seemed ordinary on the surface. Small town, routines, strict religious parents, a disciplined household. But even then, something in Herman's eyes unnerved those around him. Too calm, too watchful, as though he were studying people not with affection, but with calculation. As a boy, Herman displayed 2 obsessions: medicine and control. He dissected animals with the curiosity of a scientist, but without the compassion of one. His classmates recalled how he seemed almost delighted by the act of pulling life apart. By his teenage years, he had already mastered the art of lying. He borrowed money without repaying it, tricked friends into small scams, and manipulated teachers with his charm. Even in youth, Herman's brilliance was poisoned with deceit. In 1882, Herman entered medical school in Michigan. There, his charm only deepened. Professors praised him, fellow students admired him, women found him attentive, polite, even magnetic. But behind closed doors, Herman began experimenting with darker pursuits. He stole cadavers from the anatomy, lab disfigured them, and staged accidents, collecting insurance payouts on the corpses he claimed were victims. It was a perfect scheme. Death turned into money, cloaked in respectability. And Herman discovered something more than profit. He discovered power. When he left school, Herman left more than cadavers behind. He abandoned his name. He reinvented himself as Dr. Henry Howard Holmes, a name that sounded polished, trustworthy, noble. Holmes was everything Herman was not: refined, charismatic, ambitious. With a bowler hat and tailored suit, Holmes could walk into any parlor or office and command respect, and no one questioned that beneath the smile. The old Herman still lurked, hungry. Holmes understood that charm was his greatest disguise. He knew exactly how to make people feel seen, valued, desired. Women described him as gentle, attentive, a dreamer who spoke of the future with conviction. But those closest to him learned quickly that his affection was shallow, his promises hollow. He married multiple women, often simultaneously, abandoning them when they were no longer useful. And yet no scandal ever seemed to follow him. Holmes always emerged untarnished, moving to the next town, the next opportunity, with his reputation intact. He was not running from suspicion. He was learning how to perfect it. By the late 1880s, Holmes drifted through jobs, pharmacist, salesman, conman. But it was in Chicago that his ambitions found their true stage. Here, amid the chaos of the growing city, Holmes could be anyone he wished. The young doctor, the charming landlord, the faithful husband, the brilliant businessman. But beneath those masks he was already planning something far more sinister. The murder castle was not born of sudden madness. It was the result of years of practice, of deception, control, and manipulation perfected in every town he passed through. Herman Webster Mudgett was a boy who learned to lie. Dr. H. Holmes was a man who learned to kill. And Chicago in the summer of 1893 would become his hunting ground. In 1889, on the corner of Wallace and 63rd Street in Chicago's Englewood district, H. Holmes laid the foundation for his masterpiece. To the public, it was a business venture, a hotel, a pharmacy, a place of commerce to serve the thousands of visitors who would soon flood the city for the World's Fair. But Holmes knew the truth. He was not building a hotel. He was building a trap. Neighbors noticed how strangely the project advanced. Crews were hired, then suddenly fired. Blueprints were redrawn again and again. Some walls went up, only to be torn down the next week. This was no accident. Holmes deliberately kept workers in the dark. No single man ever saw the full design. Each only worked on fragments. A hallway here, a stairwell there, never knowing how the pieces fit together. And when their job was done, Holmes dismissed them without pay. Lawsuits followed, but Holmes slipped through them with charm and excuses. The result was a building born of confusion and secrecy. The finished structure loomed over the neighborhood like a fortress, 3 stories tall, stretching nearly a block, with over 100 rooms. But inside, its design defied reason. Some hallways led nowhere, ending abruptly in brick walls. Staircases ascended only to stop at ceilings. Windows opened to reveal nothing but more bricks. And then there were the rooms, dozens of them. Some soundproofed, some fitted with gas lines hidden in the walls, others with doors that locked only up. From the outside, there were chutes, narrow shafts disguised as closets that dropped straight into the basement. And beneath the building, a furnace roared, large enough to incinerate more than just garbage. Holmes's basement was the heart of the castle, a place no guest was meant to see. Down narrow stairs lay a network of rooms filled with instruments not for healing, but for disposal. Acid vats, quicklime pits, a dissecting table. And the furnace, built larger than any bakery's, its flames devouring whatever Holmes fed it. If the hotel above was a stage, the basement was its grave. Holmes cloaked all of this behind respectability. The first floor hosted a pharmacy, jewelry shops and businesses that made the building appear legitimate. To passers-by, it was simply another enterprise of Chicago's booming economy. But above those storefronts, guests checked into rooms they would never leave. Holmes often advertised positions for young women, secretaries, stenographers, assistants. They came eagerly seeking employment in a modern city. He welcomed them with charm, offered lodging in his hotel, and then they vanished. In Chicago's chaos, disappearances were common. Holmes counted on it, and the castle was always hungry. Every hallway, every chamber, every locked door spoke of more than murder. They spoke of control. Holmes did not simply want victims to die, he wanted them disoriented, trapped, stripped of hope before the end. The castle was his instrument, a maze where he alone knew the exits. It was not just a place of death, it was a theater of despair. The World's Fair was coming. Millions would arrive in Chicago, overflowing into every hotel, boarding house, and rented room. And on Wallace Street, the murder castle stood ready, its walls painted with respectability, its corridors echoing with silence, its furnace waiting for the fire to burn. Holmes was no longer just a doctor or a conman. He was the architect of a nightmare. And soon, the castle would open its doors. Chicago was a city of hope. But for many young women, that hope ended at the corner of Wallace, and 63rd at Holmes's castle drew them in with promises of safety, employment, and charm. And once inside, no one ever saw them again. In the 1890s, Chicago was overflowing with ambition. Women left rural towns to seek work in the city. Shop clerks, stenographers, nurses, secretaries. For many, Holmes's advertisements seemed like salvation. Positions available, young women needed, young. Lodging provided. He knew exactly what they wanted: stability, independence, respect. And with his tailored suit and soft voice, Holmes embodied the dream of a modern gentleman. He was polite, attentive, and quick to offer trust. But trust was his favorite weapon. One of Holmes's earliest known victims was Julia Smythe, a woman who worked in his pharmacy. Julia was attractive, confident, and quickly became involved with Holmes, despite his already being married. Neighbors recalled seeing Julia walking proudly at Holmes's side, believing she had found security. But she also had a daughter, Pearl, and when Julia began pressing Holmes for commitment, she and Pearl both disappeared. Holmes explained it away. Julia had gone to visit family, he claimed. Few questioned it. Chicago was full of transients after all, but Julia and her daughter were never seen again. The furnace in Holmes's basement burned hotter than ever that week. Julia was not alone. Holmes targeted women who were isolated, ambitious, or naive to the dangers of the city. He offered jobs, flattered them, and sometimes even promised marriage. He seemed to represent everything respectable: a doctor, a businessman, a man of means. Who could imagine that behind his polite smile lay a predator calculating every move? Another young woman was Emmeline Sigrand, a secretary who caught Holmes's eye in 1892. Friends remembered Emmeline as vivacious, independent, and eager to build a new life. Holmes wooed her with gifts and promises, convincing her to move into the castle. Then one winter's day, she vanished. Holmes claimed she had eloped with another man, but workers in the castle whispered of seeing Emmeline enter a vault, a steel-lined room Holmes had installed. The door closed, and no one saw her come out. In a city as vast and chaotic as Chicago, disappearances were common. People left without notice. Letters failed to arrive. A missing woman was explained as a runaway, a romantic tryst, a new job in another town. Holmes knew this. He thrived on it, and so the castle became a hungry mouth, swallowing one woman after another, while the city outside danced in the glow of the World's Fair. Each victim had the same story: a young woman, drawn by charm or opportunity, promised safety, lured into the castle. Then silence. Holmes left behind no witnesses, only ashes, only whispers, and the city looked away. The murder castle was no longer just a building. It was a predator in brick and mortar. And as the gates of the World's Fair opened in 1893, millions of visitors surged into Chicago. Among them were countless young women, travelers, dreamers, innocents, stepping eagerly toward the future. Holmes was waiting for them. In May of 1893, the gates of the World's Columbian Exposition opened, and Chicago became the beating heart of the modern world. 27 million people would visit the fairgrounds over 6 months, marveling at electric lights, the Ferris wheel, and wonders of industry. The city was alive with music, laughter, and the promise of progress. But on the corner of Wallace and 63rd, the murder castle opened its doors as well. And while the fair promised light, Holmes promised something else entirely. The fair drew people from every corner of America and from across the world. Many traveled alone, carrying little more than a suitcase and a dream. They arrived without family, without friends, without anyone to watch over them. For Holmes, it was a perfect hunting ground. He could offer rooms at his hotel, jobs at his businesses, or simply a smile and a hand to guide lost travelers. If someone vanished in the flood of the fair, who would notice? A letter that never arrived, a family who assumed their daughter had found work in another city. In a crowd of millions, one missing face meant nothing. Holmes understood this better than anyone. Holmes advertised his building as a hotel for fairgoers. Affordable, modern, conveniently located. Guests checked in, leaving their names in ledgers. That looked perfectly respectable, but those ledgers became a list of the vanished. For once inside, guests were led through corridors that twisted into confusion, into rooms that locked from the outside, into chambers that whispered with gas lines hidden in the walls. The castle was not simply a hotel. It was a net waiting to tighten. women looking for work, couples seeking lodging, families eager to see the fair. They came. They smiled at Holmes's charm. They handed over their trust, and they never returned. Neighbours noticed the steady stream of young women arriving at Holmes's hotel, but far fewer ever leaving. When asked, Holmes had excuses ready. They had married, moved west, gone home. His words were smooth enough that suspicion melted away. But beneath the castle, the furnace burned steadily, its smoke curling into the sky like a silent confession. The fair also gave Holmes new opportunities to profit. He sold bogus insurance policies, swindled suppliers, and even scammed investors who thought they were funding a legitimate business. But money was never his only goal. Control was, and the fair gave him endless new faces to control, each one disposable, each one easy to erase. The castle was alive with his schemes, each corridor another trick, each room another snare. What made Holmes so dangerous was not brute force, but trust. His victims walked willingly into his traps because he made them feel secure. He was a doctor, a landlord, a businessman. He shook hands with the wealthy and smiled at the poor. He was the very picture of respectability. But behind the locked doors of the murder castle, respectability became a mask, one that hid Chicago's darkest secret. The key. World's Fair dazzled millions with wonders of light and progress, but just blocks away, the castle devoured those who strayed too close. The fair was built to celebrate humanity's future. Holmes built his castle to erase it, and soon whispers of the vanished would begin to stir. Whispers that the man in the bowler hat was no gentleman at all. In a city as vast as Chicago, whispers often disappeared into the noise, but by the height of the World's Fair, too many whispers surrounded the man they called Dr. H. Holmes. Neighbors noticed. Workers noticed. Even merchants noticed. And yet, somehow, no one dared to act. Those who lived near the castle spoke of strange things. They heard cries in the night, muffled, cut short. They saw women enter the hotel, suitcases in hand, only for Holmes to explain days later that they had suddenly moved west or returned home. Some neighbors swore they smelled chemical odors drifting from the building's basement, sharp, sour, metallic. Holmes dismissed it as routine cleaning for his pharmacy. And the neighbors, uneasy but polite, accepted his words. After all, Holmes always smiled. Construction workers told darker tales. Men hired to build the castle reported bizarre instructions, walls erected only to be torn down, rooms sealed without explanation, hallways that looped into themselves. One worker claimed he was ordered to install a chute that led straight to the basement. When he asked its purpose, Holmes fired him on the spot. Others complained of not being paid, but few pressed charges. Holmes threatened lawsuits, hinted at powerful connections, and wore the air of a man untouchable, and when the work was done, none could explain what they had truly built. Merchants too began to whisper. Holmes ordered furniture, clothing, even custom safes, only to refuse payment once they were delivered. When debt collectors arrived, Holmes met them with icy politeness, guiding them through his labyrinthine building until they lost all sense of direction. By the time they left, shaken and confused, Holmes's debts remained unpaid. It was as though the castle itself conspired with him, a maze designed not only for death but for deception. Yet despite these suspicions, Holmes remained untouchable. His charm disarmed the doubtful, his threats silenced the bold, and in a city overflowing with strangers who would risk accusing a doctor, a businessman, a man who smiled at children and tipped his hat to policemen, Chicago was too busy celebrating the fair to confront the darkness festering in its streets. Even police officers admitted later that they had ignored warning signs. Disappearances were common. Young women vanished every week in Chicago, runaways, suicides, victims of crime. Families filed missing person reports, but with millions flowing in and out of the city, cases were rarely pursued. Holmes understood this better than anyone. He relied on it. Each vanished girl was explained away as another drifter, another runaway, and the castle kept its secrets. There were, however, a few who saw too much. A boy delivering goods to the hotel once stumbled into a room with strange stains on the floor. Holmes caught him staring and placed a hand on his shoulder, whispering calmly, "Curiosity is dangerous, my boy. Some doors aren't meant to be opened." The boy never returned. He told no one. But years later, he admitted that Holmes's eyes, cold, unblinking, haunted him every night of his life. The neighbors smelled chemicals. The workers built traps they didn't understand. The merchants left unpaid, confused and unsettled. And yet Holmes walked among them untarnished, his bowler hat tipped, his moustache neat, his smile warm. But smiles can only last so long, and soon the walls of the murder castle would begin to talk. For years, the murder castle had kept its silence. Its walls had hidden the cries. Its furnace had devoured the evidence. And its owner, Dr. H. Holmes, had walked free, his smile convincing Chicago that nothing was amiss. But by 1894, Holmes's lies began to unravel. And when investigators finally stepped inside the castle, what they found shocked America to its core. It was not murder that first drew police to Holmes, but fraud. Holmes had woven countless schemes. Swindling. Insurance companies, cheating suppliers, scamming business partners. But one fraud, an insurance scam involving a fake death, caught the attention of investigators. Holmes fled Chicago, drifting through several states, leaving behind a trail of unpaid debts and unanswered questions. With him gone, attention turned, at last, to the strange building he had left behind. In 1895, police entered the castle for a full investigation. At first glance, it seemed ordinary: brick walls, furnished rooms, a respectable facade. But as they explored deeper, the building revealed its true nature. Hallways twisted into dead ends, staircases stopped at blank walls, doors opened onto nothing. Rooms were windowless, airless, soundproofed. And then there was the basement. Down narrow steps, police found a nightmare hidden in plain sight. There was a massive furnace, its iron door blackened with use. Scattered nearby were bones, some animal, some believed human, charred beyond recognition. They found vats of acid, pits of quicklime, surgical tables stained with marks, and shelves lined with jars that held what investigators described as biological specimens. One room contained a steel vault, airtight and lined with gas pipes. Its door was scarred with scratch marks, desperate fingernails clawing from the inside. When word leaked to the press, newspapers exploded with headlines. They called it the Murder Castle. They described hidden chambers, torture rooms, and incinerators built for bodies. Some accounts exaggerated, others were true, but all carried the same message. America had never seen anything like it. The idea of a man designing an entire building for murder horrified the nation, and H. Holmes was no longer just a conman. He was a monster. Neighbors came forward at last, recalling the strange smells, the chemical fumes, the muffled cries that had echoed at night. Workers admitted their confusion at Holmes's bizarre demands during construction. Merchants remembered his odd behavior, his refusal to let anyone explore the building freely. The puzzle pieces fit together at last, and the image they formed was unthinkable. The castle was more than brick and mortar. It was Holmes's mind made physical, a labyrinth of control, fear, and death. But even as the evidence mounted, the full truth of how many had perished within its walls would never be known. The furnace had erased too much. The acid had devoured too much. And Holmes was still alive, still smiling, still ready to talk. In November of 1894, after months on the run, Dr. H. Holmes was finally arrested in Boston. At first, he was charged not with murder, but with insurance fraud. Yet by then, investigators had uncovered the horrors of the castle, and soon the nation's eyes turned to the man now being called America's first serial killer. Holmes's trial in 1895 was unlike anything America had seen. Newspapers could not print fast enough. Every detail of his handsome face, his calm demeanor, and his chilling crimes filled headlines across the country. The public was captivated by the paradox. How could a man so polite, so charming, so intelligent build a hotel designed to kill? In court, Holmes behaved not like a man facing death, but like a performer. He smiled at the jury. He addressed the judge with eloquence. He even cross-examined witnesses himself, speaking with the calm authority of a doctor lecturing students. Reporters noted that he never raised his voice, never lost his composure, even as the evidence of his crimes mounted. Bones, blueprints, testimonies, Holmes sat with unnerving serenity, as though he controlled even this stage. The jury and the world stared not at a monster, but at a mask. The prosecution focused on one undeniable case, the murder of Benjamin Pitezel, a business associate Holmes had killed during an insurance scam. But as testimony unfolded, more and more vanished lives were tied to Holmes. Julia and Pearl Smythe, Emmeline Sigrand, dozens of young women who had worked for him, lived in his hotel, or entered the castle never to return. Each story painted the same picture. Holmes lured the innocent with promises of work, safety, or affection, then erased them. After his conviction, Holmes began to speak more freely. At first, he claimed innocence. Then, as reporters pressed him, he confessed to 9 murders. Days later, he raised the number to 27. Some papers reported he hinted at more than 100. Others claimed he suggested 200. No one knew what to believe. Holmes seemed to change his story each time he spoke. But in every version, the truth was clear. The castle had claimed countless lives, and Holmes alone knew how many. Perhaps most chilling were Holmes's reflections on himself. He described his lack of remorse, admitting that killing came to him as naturally as breathing. He once wrote, "I was born with the devil in me. I could not help the fact that I was a murderer, no more than the poet can help the inspiration to sing." Reporters described these words not as the ravings of a madman, but the calm observations of a man dissecting his own soul. Holmes was not insane. He was something far worse, deliberate. In October of 1895, Holmes was sentenced to death by hanging. Even then, he remained composed, bowing politely to the judge as though concluding a business deal. The newspapers called him the Beast of Chicago. But to the end, Holmes insisted he was simply misunderstood. The jury had looked into his eyes and seen nothing. No remorse, no fear. Only calculation. Holmes had built his castle as a theatre of death. Now, he himself would stand on the scaffold. But even in his final days, Holmes carried with him one last mystery, a secret he would take to the grave. And when the noose tightened around his neck, the question remained, had America truly seen the full extent of his crimes, or had the murder castle buried its darkest truths forever? On May 7, 1896, in Philadelphia, Herman Webster Mudgett, the man the world knew as Dr. H. Holmes, was led to the gallows. Dressed in a fine suit, his bowler hat resting neatly. In his hands, Holmes looked more like a gentleman at church than a killer about to die. Before the crowd of witnesses, he maintained the same calm composure he had shown in court. No trembling, no tears, only the faint, knowing smile of a man who had lived by deception, and now intended to die with it. As the noose was placed around his neck, Holmes spoke his final words. "Gentlemen, I have very few words to say. I am guilty of killing only 2 persons. I wish to add, not one of those I deceived was murdered." The trapdoor opened, the rope snapped taut, but death did not come quickly. For 15 long minutes, Holmes hung struggling, his body twisting, refusing to die easily. Witnesses later remarked that even in death he seemed to defy the natural order, as though the devil he claimed to be born with would not let go. Finally the body stilled. Holmes was gone, or so it seemed. Back in Chicago, his murder castle stood as a monument to terror. Crowds gathered outside, pointing at the windows, imagining the horrors that had taken place inside. But in August of 1895, before Holmes was even executed, the castle itself seemed to rebel against its own existence. A fire broke out in the night, consuming much of the interior. Some said it was arson, an attempt to erase the building's secrets. Others swore it was the work of Holmes's accomplices destroying evidence before police could find more. Whatever the truth, the murder castle was left a blackened ruin, its twisted bricks jutting out like broken teeth. A place cursed by the memory of screams that no longer echoed. Holmes confessed to 27 murders. Authorities suspected more than 200. The truth was buried with the bodies the castle consumed, with the ashes its furnace reduced to dust. To this day, historians debate the number. Was he a prolific killer who slaughtered by the hundreds? Or
a liar who inflated his own legend to ensure immortality in headlines? The one fact no one disputes is that Holmes was unlike anything America had seen before. A man who built an empire of death inside a building designed to hide his crimes.
a man who turned progress itself, the booming city, the shining World's Fair, into his hunting ground. In the years since, Holmes has become more than a man. He is a myth, a ghost, a reminder that evil does not always wear rags or chains. Sometimes it wears a suit, tips its hat, and smiles politely as it opens the door to hell. The murder castle is long gone, replaced by a post office that stands quietly over the ashes. But locals still whisper. Some claim they hear footsteps pacing in the night. Others swear they smell burning chemicals when no fire is lit. And in the shadows of Chicago, the name H. Holmes still carries a weight, not of history, but of warning. So tonight, as you've walked with us through the corridors of Holmes's castle, ask yourself, how many entered those doors, never to return? How many secrets still lie buried beneath Chicago's streets? And most of all, do you believe Holmes was truly gone when the rope finally stilled? If this story has haunted you, tell us. Where in the world are you watching from? And if you want more shadows of history, more secrets the world tried to bury, subscribe to Cold Mysteries. Because every week, we open another locked door, and not all doors should be opened.